as Elliot was saying, I had an organization called GDG Inspire. We advise clients on a better use of strategic communications in the field of security and defense. And what I'm trying to do here is really aggregating insights that I have collected in the last, almost 10 years, working with governments and organizations at the EU level, but also national governments, and trying to consolidate a bit what I've seen. So the main finding, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything surprising here, is we do not have a common understanding of what strategic communication is. I don't want to get into the academic definitions. I mean, we are not here for this. I'm not going to annoy you, especially after lunch. My point being that if we do not have a common understanding and a common definition of strategic communication, there are a sort of cascade effects onto these 5 buckets that I'm going to dive into like in a few seconds. Strategic communication, as I see it now implemented, it's basically a better and upgraded version of traditional government communication. So there is not yet a focus on behaviors, attitudes, sentiments, but it's still about communicating better facts. And that, I think, is the strategic mistake in not using strategic communication to the full potential. So the previous slide was listing 5 kind of buckets of where I see the lack of definition falling into and creating problems and hampering success. So the first one is the impact on the architecture. So not in every government architecture it is clear where strategic communication sits. There are different constellations. So sometimes it's within the MFA, and in that case, it's more into public diplomacy. MOI, so more policy, of course, internal security. MOD, more into the external kind of FIMI environment, or Prime Minister's office. And in that case, this, of course, gets very, very political. That also creates an issue when you need to identify, so it's a problem of where the discipline sits within the architecture, and of course also who is working on that. So when you are to identify who is the STRACOM lead of a certain country, that you might run into the problem of the person actually even not knowing that they do STRACOMs, but they actually do, because it's not phrased as such. And that's where, again, the lack of definition, I think, creates an issue. Last but not least, when we talk about architecture and PCVE, what we've seen is that it's still mainly relying on law enforcement, if not intelligence services. And for as much as law enforcement and intelligence services are needed, I think we would all agree that maybe it's not within their main priorities, which also means that they lack the expertise, that indeed is not their priority. So STRACOM becomes not a fundamental part of PCVE and prevention, but it remains a nice to have. So if there is extra money, if there is someone that happens to have the expertise, then we do a bit of STRACOM. So I've just touched upon the expertise point. Again, there is a lack of specialization in the field, not just in terms of STRACOM, but also underpinning disciplines of STRACOM. So press attaché, amazing jobs, they are needed, but it's not about how we better communicate facts. This is about, as we heard earlier, is about emotions and how we leverage emotion for a strategic objective. So it's a completely different thing that requires different sets of expertise. So neuroscience and behavioral scientists, and so on and so forth. Also, there is, in my personal opinion, a misunderstanding when it comes to STRACOM, because it is understood as public communication, or it is understood or as political communication, especially when it's in cabinets offices. And that creates a problem because, and I'm going to the policy part, if we leave STRACOMs to the political let's say, layer, we miss opportunities because we are driven by political priorities. They change, which is perfect, but we are hampered in doing long-term policies. So we need to, and that's why it is important that STRACOM, it is recognized as a policy that is horizontal within government and it is applicable to different policy areas so that we can have long-term investments, we can have programs that run across different governments, and we are not necessarily driven by political priorities. And we build the resilience necessary to build resistance to hostile narratives. I'm just going back a bit on the expertise point, because the other point I wanted to make is that not just the expertise in terms of this discipline is lacking, but it's also about the demographics of our teams, because we always talk about the demographics, about the target audience. We should talk about the demographics of our teams, because even if we outsource the research analysis and we are able to capture the demographic of the target audience, this doesn't mean that the people that make the decisions are actually able to understand what are the grievances of the target audience. And I think there is a gap there. Needless to say, if we don't understand what we are talking about, we cannot cooperate. So what I have experienced in the last years is a bit the hamster in the wheel. So we keep on doing same programs, same training, but there is no impactful shift because we are still repeating the same concepts. In addition, the cooperation is hampered not just, so to say, between the trainer and the trainee, or the consultant and let's say, the trainee, so to say, but also between different levels of implementation of programs. So grassroots policy, intel, security, defense, national, supranational. And again, if we agreed on what STRACOM is, I think this would be a bit better. M&E, I mean, we can talk a lot about this, but I know my time is running out, so I will not focus in on that. But of course, this depends on the fact that STRACOM is not a recognized policy. So we don't build sustainable M&E metrics for STRACOMs because it's not a policy, and we don't allocate enough budget to that. All in all, there is a reduced potential and ambition for strategic communication, which leaves a vacuum in proactive narrative formation, which basically exposes vulnerable audiences and overall society to malign influences. I will leave it to that. Maybe we will expand on the way forward later on with some questions.